right, so now we get to Pliny the Younger. Let's see what Metatron thinks about Pliny the Younger's reference. I cannot help but to think that he is not going to accept Pliny. He's definitely going to say that this is just talking about what Christians believed in the 2nd century, because that's the context surrounding Pliny the Younger. I hope I'm not wrong. Oh fuck, I'm wrong, aren't I? That's right, honey, I am wrong. Fuck me.
As far as the validity of Pliny the Younger's testimony, it's complete general consensus that it's authentic. Also because we have the letter of response of Emperor Trajan, which again speaks about the same thing, so the two things can be double-checked and cross-referenced. It's authentic.
Yes, Pliny did write his particular reference, but that doesn't say anything about Jesus existing. Pliny would have gotten his information from Christians in the 2nd century. He directly says this. They would have already had at least 3 gospels preached to them, if not 4. So it's no surprise that Pliny would report what he did, but it also means that we don't have an independent account for Jesus. Why does he even bring this up? He's not even doing source criticism on it. He should be rejecting this particular reference on context alone. Okay, now we get to his take on Suetonius. Okay, Suetonius does not talk about Christ. He talks about Christus. There's no way. He's got to say this is not a reference. He has to say that because it's not a reference. If you literally just read the fucking words on the page, it's not a reference to Jesus.
But most importantly, of historical significance, the mention of the instigator, meaning Christus, which is again a different spelling of Christus, both being a period for the time. Now, the validity of these testimonies at the moment is not questioned in the academia, and that is because you have to remember that the Romans were particularly meticulous when it came to both records, and these are all period.
Okay, Suetonius wouldn't have misspelled Christos with Christus. For one thing, Suetonius knows how to spell Christians. So if he meant Christos or Christians, he would have spelt it correctly. Also, the grammar of that particular section does not seem to indicate that Christ or, the savior of the Jews was the one that instigated anything, because the instigated word that's used there to describe Christus means that Christus is the person that instigated things. Considering that this was written in the 50s, there's no way that Jesus could have been the instigator. So this is just not a reference to Jesus at all. So this is yet another piece of evidence that he has looked at uncritically and seems to have done no critical source analysis on the passage. All he does is verify that the person that supposedly wrote it authentically wrote it, and then he speculates and changes things about the passage in order for it to support a historical Jesus. What the fuck is going on? Dishonesty. Dishonesty's going on. Oh Christ. Next is Bar-Serapion. Why does anybody bring this motherfucker up? I don't know. Let's see what Metatron says about it.
Now, even though on this letter there is no mention of the word Christos or the name Christos, or should we say title, Messiah, it is still interesting because he does call him the King of the Jews, which we know was not only an expression that was not used by the Christians, but it was an expression that is linked to what was written on top of the cross of Jesus with the letters in re, which translate Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judae, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews.
Now, for Bar-Serapion, we can't really nail down a very specific date. The best that we can do is say that it was written sometime between 73 CE and the 3rd century. The most likely date is sometime in the mid-2nd century. The problem with that, though, is that it automatically rules him out as having any kind of independent knowledge about Jesus. The reason for this is that the Gospels were written so early in Christian history that by the time you get to the early to mid 2nd century, the idea that Jesus walked on earth and everything like that was already part of the Gospels. So any kind of information you pull from that point in time forward is going to be tainted by the Gospels. So the Christians that obviously informed Bar-Serapion about their faith knew about the Gospels and what they said and the story of Jesus. So, like, for instance, one of the particular teachings about Jesus that's contained in the Gospels and shows that the Christians that he got his information from are tainted by the Gospels is this whole idea that Jesus is the King of the Jews. It dates back to a prophecy in Isaiah 9:6-7 that claims that he will be the King of the Jews. Also, Mara connecting the death of this wise king to the destruction of the temple and blaming the Jews for his death show that he was definitely getting his information from the Gospels in one fashion or another. And since he got his information, either directly or indirectly, from the Gospels, that means that he is not an independent source of Jesus. And yet again, Metatron shows that he obviously has not done any kind of source criticism or historical research on the references that he's pulling up. If he had, he wouldn't have even mentioned Bar-Serapion. Now, I don't know what scholars he was looking at. My initial guess is that he was looking at Christian apologists, and maybe not historical scholars on this particular subject. A lot of Christian apologists like to tout themselves as being historians, like Mike Licona. Or Gary Habermas. The fact that you have to ignore information about a reference in order to make it work for your conclusion shows me that you're just being dishonest. Oh, now he's going to go over Lucian of Samosata. Great!
Now again, this is one of those non-Roman mentions that do not use the term Christ specifically, but they do mention the crucifixion. They call him a sage and a lawgiver. And also, further on in his writing, Lucian mentions that the Christians were using sacred writings.
Okay, so Lucian's writing was done in 165 CE. That's the mid-2nd century. Considering that Christians would have known the gospel message, they would have been exposed to all of the quote-unquote historical stories about Jesus, kind of seems like he's most likely tainted. Just like I said before with Bar-Serapion and him writing in the mid-2nd century, the same time that Lucian's writing, they are both tainted by the gospel message. It just seems like this entire video is an example of how Metatron fails to do any kind of source criticism on the references that he's pulling up. Can you really trust any kind of historical information that he gives you? Because it seems like he doesn't know how to do any kind of historical research. I'm not saying this as some kind of like professional historian or anything like that. I don't have degrees, but I have been in this particular discussion long enough to know what proper source criticism and historical research looks like. This is not it. I mean, if he had done literally any kind of research on this particular passage, he would have found Robert Van Voorst saying this. Most of the correct information he relates about Christianity was common knowledge in his time. Robert Van Voorst, Jesus outside the New Testament. All right. So just close your eyes for a second and imagine that the only reason why we believe that the Titanic sank was because the grandson of a guy who knew a friend who heard about the Titanic sinking. That is the kind of evidence that Metatron has presented today. He's uncritically accepted every single reference he's brought up as long as it was authentically written by the person and it confirms his conclusion that Jesus existed, whether or not it would be an independent source, which is what we really need in this discussion. After all this, I feel like Metatron has no idea how to do historical research, at least when it concerns Jesus.